Thank you, everyone, for coming. We want to welcome you to tonight's Tertulia. I'll begin by introducing our organizers. So these events are put on by a group of faculty from STU and UNB, and we'll begin with Daniel Tubb from UNB, Tracy Glynn from St. Thomas and UNB, Matthew Hayes from UNB, and me, Christy Elaine from St. Thomas University. The organizers for this event are on the unceded territories of the Wistagoi people. These treaties are covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, and we would ask that you take some time today, maybe throughout the event and after, to reflect on the colonial relations of power that work to structure this land and our access to it. We would also like to thank our sponsors for the event, the NB Media Co-op, who will publish this event, the recording of the event, on their website in the coming days, and the Tabik River Trading Company for their support of the event. And with that, I'll turn this over to Tracy Glynn, who will introduce our speaker for tonight.
Thanks, Christy. Tonight we are fortunate to be joined by Dr. Margaret Kress. Margaret is joining us from Saskatoon. Margaret was born in Saskatchewan on Treaty 4 territory in the Métis homelands. She proudly embraces her Michif ancestry and continues to honor her French, English, and German relations. Margaret works closely with elders, knowledge keepers, and community leaders throughout Canada to ensure Indigenous truths are brought forth and right action is taken. As an adjunct professor at the University of New Brunswick, she supports graduate students as they focus on critical issues associated with Indigenous governance, child welfare, and education. She is the recipient of several national and provincial grants and has conducted academic and community-based research to support initiatives led by Indigenous communities. She is the author of several publications in Canadian Women's Studies, Kimiwan of Land and Living Skies, a community journal on place, land, and learning, and Honoring Indigenous Women Hearts of Nation. And currently, Margaret is on a learning path with elders across our lands as she embraces traditional and plant medicine teachings in her daily life. And she's going to be tonight talking to us about Winona LaDuke. And Margaret, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. So the presentation I'm going to bring to you tonight is my knowledge of Winona LaDuke's lifetime activism in terms of environmental action and Indigenous knowledge from an Anishinaabe perspective. So I'm just going to get started and acknowledge that I'm coming to you from my homelands here in Saskatchewan in Treaty 6 territory, and that I am looking at my family as a piece of, what I have to do and what I have to offer in terms of who I am and what I bring to this presentation today. So just so that you know that I do have many names, and one of those names is Tahkwaki Waapikwani Iskwew, which means autumn flower woman, which I was gifted by a Cree elder many years ago. And so my knowledge base really is tied up in my own ancestry and that of the Michif peoples, and also the Cree worldview. I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, the people of the Wabanaki lands that I am not on right now today, but those people that have been instrumental really to the work that I'm doing today and to the work that I've done in the last 5 years. And you can see the picture at the very top with my daughter. This is in Mi'kmaq territory at Pabineau Falls in northern New Brunswick, where my children are from. And so I'd like to acknowledge the lands of the Wabanaki, the Wolastoqey peoples, and the Mi'kmaq peoples that I work with primarily, and also all of the 5 nations of the Wabanaki and the lands that the peoples are from. Of course, I am on Treaty 6 territory and the homelands of the Métis today as I speak to you, and I hold those territories in my heart because it's my home. This is where I am from. So you can see there's a picture of my mom at the top and me at the bottom in the grasslands in Treaty 4 territory where I was born. And then there's one also in South America in near Cusco. So I think it's important that we honor the many territories that we take part in learning about and visiting, and the people that we learn from in these territories. So I give thanks to all of those people, to all of the knowledge keepers and the elders, and of course, our multiple ancestors. In this slide, I want to just talk about the reality that Winona LaDuke brings to us. And she has this, in all of her presentations, wherever she goes, she talks about all my relations. And Nigakana Gana Na. And I'm not an Ojibwe speaker at all. I don't know the Ojibwe language. It's one of the Algonquin languages. But she has this idea of relationality, which is much similar to the relationship that we have as Métis peoples, Wakutawin or Wakotawin in Cree or Neheyao. And it means that we're in relationship, and that is how we come to understand all that is Indigenous to our belief systems and our culture. And we have an acceptance that we are all related. So humankind and non-humankind, we're all living, we're all related. And with that, we come to a state of kindredness, which allows us to gain an understanding of the language, of the ceremony, and of the traditions of the peoples and the places that we are situated within. So this idea of relationality or Wakutawin really leads us to this place of Pamatsawin or Mino Bamatsawin, which is the Ojibwe understanding that she speaks of. And without coming to that place, we can't really reach for what Winona LaDuke is telling us to reach for. So we have to understand that, first of all, we are in relationship. So I want to just talk to you a little bit about the biography of Winona LaDuke. For more than 40 years, she's been an activist, she's been an environmentalist, she's been an economist, she's been a politician, she has been a traditionalist, and she is a hemp grower. She has belonged to and started multiple organizations. She's ran as a nominee for the Green Party under the tutelage of Ralph Nader as the ticketed head for vice president. And she really has played an active role in many resistances in American Native resistances, primarily in the United States. She was instrumental with the resistance at Standing Rock, for example. She has been involved in the Dakota Access Pipeline. She's been a resistor to Enbridge and a number of other initiatives, extractive industry initiatives that can cause damage to the waters and those that live on the lands of those of her territories. Something else about Winona LaDuke is when she was young, I mean, she was an activist as a child. She started attending these environmental and human rights protests with her mother. Her mother was born in the Bronx, and her father, of course, is from Minnesota. He's an Anishinaabe from the White Earth Reservation, the one where she lives now, or was. He's passed away. Her mother is still living. So she's had a long history of parent tutelage, I suppose, that gave her a stand up in terms of becoming an academic, becoming an activist, becoming a spokesperson for Indigenous peoples, and knowing how to bridge the differences between Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities because of who her parents are. As a white woman from the Bronx, a Jewish person, and a person from Indigenous and a strong Indigenous community. So I would like to just say that, she's been the director of an organization called Honor the Earth, and she was the founder of the White Earth Land Recovery Project, which is a project that she started quite a number of years ago with her vision of a hemp farm and a hemp mill. And in that vision also became her role as a protector for the wild rice and any modifications or initiatives that, for example, the University of Minnesota and Monsanto or other conglomerates were trying to impose upon the wild rice of her community. She's won many, many awards. She's been a human rights activist, as I said, for at least 40 years. And she's won awards for all of these various types of projects. She is a graduate of Harvard and another university. She's written extensively with a variety of peoples, and some of the best resources that I try to refer to students is one of her books called All Our Relations, Struggles for Land and Life. And that's one of her earlier books that's been around for at least 20 years. And the other is Recovering the Sacred, The Power of Naming and Claiming, which she put out in the early 2000s. And more recently, she has another book, The Chronicles of Winona LaDuke, and all of her relationships with a variety of Indigenous communities and their roles in environmental resistances and justice right across Turtle Island. I'd say that the thing about Winona LaDuke, something that's really important to remember, is that she always goes back to the Anishinaabe prophecies. The one main prophecy is the one about the seventh fire. And she talks about that in many of her presentations and about the paths that we're going to choose. Are we going to, choose the old path of the scorched way, or are we going to choose the new green way? So that's one of the things that she talks about, and she talks about that today in this issue of the pandemic and the things that are being imposed upon us because of being in a pandemic. The other thing that's really important about Winona LaDuke is, she's a resistor in terms of all the extraction industries, those things like oil and gas, anything that's going to impact the water, the ecosystem, and the life that is in those ecosystems. She has been there at the front lines. So we're talking about forestry, we're talking about oil and gas, we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about a number of other initiatives, tourism even, that has impacted Anishinaabe peoples, but all peoples, Indigenous peoples throughout the world. And I think one of the most important things that she speaks about is the rematriation of seeds, or genetic or heritage seeds, as we might call them, the old seeds, and a return to kind of a sustainable understanding of life through the kind of growing that we should be doing as farmers and as people who are able to be self-sustaining. So that's really all I'm going to talk to you about there. And I'm just going to give you a little overview. Winona LaDuke also, I haven't mentioned this, but she's prolific in her writing, in her speaking, in her understanding of media, and she does a much better job than I can possibly do, which is why I've inserted a number of short videos and one longer one in this presentation. But she's just been so involved, and I want people that are watching to be able to see who she is if they don't know. This is a film that she agreed to produce with an old friend of hers, and it came out in 2016, I believe. And it's really about what is still going on, because there was a court case that went to the Supreme Court, and she was not able, they did not win at that time. So it's still in the works. And of course, with the current situation of the election and the Democrat win, there is a chance that Enbridge and some of the other lines are not going to go through. So you know, things could be changing for her community and several other communities and individuals who are resistors in this issue of oil transportation and extraction. So we're just going to take a quick look at this.
This prophecy called the time of the seventh fire. We're told that we have a choice between two paths. No tankers on Lake Superior, no pipelines in northern Minnesota. The company that wants to bring it over here is called the Enrich Company. It's going to totally destroy the rice beds of this area. It also goes through the rice beds on the White Earth Reservation. It goes through big rice splitting.
This looks like a really old book, Mom. Yeah, it looks like last century. We're still preoccupied with the early photos of Winona. They're so funny.
We're in a situation which is kind of called extreme. It's extreme behavior. That's when you no longer want conventional oil, and instead you want to go get oil from the tar sands in Canada. We got to basically destroy an entire ecosystem the size of Florida to shove it in some pipelines to down here, or you want to frack North Dakota, put a bunch of radioactive water and destroyed aquifers out there to see how people can live, or you want to do some other crazy stuff.
Because we live directly in front of the refinery. On one end of my street, we have an oil pipeline. At the other end, a hydrogen pipeline. Can you imagine? We live on a bomb.
What I will tell you is that I'm a pretty normal person, probably unlike, like the rest of you. I'm a grandmother. I've raised 6 children. You're not online. I have 8 kids who call me grandma. The fact is that this company, Enbridge, has had over 800 spills in the past decade. If that pipeline spills, it's 20,000 gallons a minute is what will be going, discharging into our territory. That's a really, really big mess.
I think it's important to see that her activism it's very fierce in many, many ways. But there's another side to Winona LaDuke in terms of what is happening in her own community and how she is reclaiming and supporting the people there. So there's these various sides of Winona LaDuke. She's a grandmother, a mother, and I think, we're complicated human beings, and so is she. And we can't just say that she's the fierce activist, because there's multiple sides to what she is offering her community, her people, her family, and we have to bear that in mind when we see the public Winona LaDuke as well. Again, I just want to draw your attention to what she's stating about these 7 generations and the 7th fire prophecy. This idea of Mino Bamadzawan, which is Pamatsawan in Cree or in Michif, the good life. She's saying we've got to do a complete switch about, a change, and that's what I want to talk about in the rest of this presentation. This is a presentation that she did in the fall of this year, so just a couple of months ago on September the 12th. She's talking about the pandemic, and she's talking about what we have to do in this time of COVID. We're all suffering from it. We're all taking a back step. We're learning that there's other ways in which we need to seek and reclaim our health. And we just have to be very conscious about the choices that we're making and the ways in which we're doing it. So this is about a 12-minute video presentation, but it says everything about what I want us to discuss as a group in terms of food sovereignty and protections, rematriation for our people, all peoples in our society.
Thank you so much for inviting me today to talk about food and justice and seeds in this time that we are in.
In this moment in time, maybe our ancestors will look to this time as the time of the seventh fire, the time when we have a choice between two paths, one well-worn and scorched. Or maybe they would refer to this in the future as the time of the bat. Because in Anishinaabe history and teachings, we've been told that a lot of times a small creature can change the world. And at this moment, said that the COVID pandemic came from a bat. In the larger picture, the United Nations talks about the loss of biodiversity as the cause of things like this pandemic, because the more that you encroach on the wild, the more dangerous things will come to your territory and to your people. That's a teaching of Anishinaabe people. That's a teaching of all of us. Don't mess with Mother Nature. So this is a talk about the times that we're in and the times that opportunity we have in this time. I like what Arundhati Roy, the Indian writer, talks about. She talks about the idea of a pandemic as a portal. In that she says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It's a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and our hatred, our avarice, our data banks, and our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through it lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight with us. We intend to walk into that next world with our communities. So I want to talk about where we are in this time. First slide I got is a slide of Geti Okosuman. It's like a really old squash. I call it the Geti Okosuman, which means really cool old squash. And inside that squash is about 1,600 seeds. 1,600 seeds. And to me, a seed, and to me, planting is a lot about promise. And a squash is a lot about promise. And Indigenous seeds and Indigenous foods are central to our survival in our future generations. And I'm going to tell you why. Because America was once very great. And in that great, there was tremendous biodiversity, from the 50 million buffalo to the agro-biodiversity of 8,000 varieties of corn. That's when America was great. The loss of biodiversity is associated with colonization and is associated with globalization. But remember, in the great times, that we were self-sufficient people and we could feed ourselves. They say you can't say you're sovereign if you can't feed yourself, and I think that's a little of the challenge that we face now. But in this moment, what we find is that Indigenous people's seeds and biodiversity still remain central to the potential to protect our world and to protect future generations. That is through adaptation. On a worldwide scale, they're spending about, major corporations like Monsanto and Syngenta are talking about climate change adaptation varieties that they're developing. They're introducing those, sucking up pretty much billions of dollars to create climate smart varieties. $136 million is the average cost for climate smart seeds per species. In the meantime, Indigenous nations worldwide are adapting our pre-petroleum varieties to the times ahead. Combined on a worldwide level, Indigenous farmers are producing today 70% of the world's food. That's our future, and that's food security. And remember also that Indigenous people are the people that, although we're about 4% of the world's population, we live over and amongst about 75% of the world's biodiversity. That's where the wild things are. That's where we live. And so what you want in the time of COVID and the time of crisis is to figure out how we're going to survive. This is really a small snapshot of what the future climate change challenged world will be. And it is our opportunity to be smarter, not to try to go back to normal, but to be smarter. So how are we going to do that? We're going to learn what relocalization is about. Oma King, how to be here on our land, here to the land which the people belong. And why do I say that? Because in the big picture, it turns out that size matters. And what I mean by that in this particular case is that big agricultural systems fail us in a time of COVID. That's to say that the average American meal travels 1,400 miles from farmer's table. That's not working. And we've just taken a pretty big hit because of that. So during the beginning of the COVID pandemic, by mid-March, farmers were dumping thousands of gallons of fresh milk into lagoons and manure pits. Idaho farmers dug ditches to bury millions of pounds of potatoes. 3.7 million gallons of milk daily, and a single chicken processor will smash 750,000 unhatched eggs every week. Big is not good, can't change fast. But what we have in our own communities is these traditional seeds. And we have this history that we are making of rematriation, the return of our seeds and the return of our traditional foods to our communities. And within that, and the transition to small-scale renewable energy, is really the security for our future. So let me talk about the potato. You know, today we are in this, we find that in northern Minnesota, we're battling the single largest independent potato grower in the country, is RDO Offit. They grow 1 or 2 varieties of potatoes, but you know, climate change scientists are looking at how to adapt potatoes now, and where they go to is, of course, Indigenous peoples. The Potato Park in Cusco, Peru is an epicenter of potato diversity today. The Peruvian museums host over 5,000 varieties of potatoes, and the park itself has about 1,300 varieties growing in the Sacred Valley of the Inca. Potatoes, which saved Europe from famine, because you know everything is underground and not above, have saved Europe from famine 300 years ago, but then were also the source of the Irish potato famine, are today being looked at to save our future generations. By sowing potatoes at different altitudes and different combinations, these potatoes create new genetic expressions that will be very important to respond to the challenges of climate change. Indigenous potatoes from those ancestors coming into the future. That is what we must do. We must rebuild our food systems. You can't travel 1,400 miles from farmer to table. And when we rebuild them, we rebuild them with a lot of our traditional varieties. Now everybody knows, or a lot of people know, I'm a corn grower. I've been growing corn for about 30 years just because my father told me that he didn't want to hear my philosophy if I couldn't grow corn. So I've been growing corn, and I grow pretty much this year. I'm growing a Mandan variety. I'm growing an Oneida white flint corn, and I'm growing a Seneca pink lady, but I also grow a Barham and flint. And what I noticed when I first grew my corn is that it was like really short. And I thought, oh, I have failed. But it turns out that a lot of these varieties don't need to grow tall. All they need to do is put on an ear. If they could put on an ear, then they put on the food that you need. So a lot of our old school varieties from my region, the north, you know, Ojibwe people pushed corn furthest north in the world, about 100 miles north of Winnipeg is where we pushed it. Those varieties are not tall, they're short. And they're frost resistant and they're drought resistant. And when the big winds came through, they blew down Monsanto's varieties, but ours stood. So plant for climate change and plant local. And then grow your food for your own community. You know, we have to do some decolonizing to remember how it is that we grow and how it is that we eat. You know, like our hominy food, when you know how to grow that and you know how to process that, that can really rock the B vitamins and improve your nutrition, you know. And what's happened to our communities, like this whole country, is that we took the Pillsbury Doughboy too seriously, and we all started looking like him. The time to move on, you know, in this time. And then, you know, we need to adapt our technology, because I was out on Pine Ridge Reservation last year, and they were trying to grow their varieties of tomatoes, and big hailstorms knocked it out, you know, a couple years in succession. So here on the White Earth Reservation and in our territory, first we grew some of our varieties in wigwams, and then there were high tunnels and then now we're building underground greenhouses, because I want to be able to feed my children and the future generations, and you know, it's good to keep it a little warmer and a little safer. And then, you know, what we're looking at is post-petroleum agriculture, because pretty much we're slathering petroleum on everything in our food system from 1,400 miles from farmer to table, to all the fossil fuels additions and all those things called side they put on food. You know, my feeling is that the word side, the suffix side, has a lot to do with like homicide and suicide and genocide, and if it ends with side, you shouldn't put it in your food. So we have this opportunity, this opportunity to rebuild local food systems, because the big food systems aren't going to work. And we do that, let's go organic. Let's go climate resilient varieties, and let's grow with our hands and our love and our horses. And then I want to talk about hemp. You know, I call that the new green revolution. And for the past 5 years, I've been growing hemp in the state of Minnesota, but I'm interested in fiber hemp. I'm interested in fiber hemp because it is the new green revolution. The fact is that, you know, they say 70 years ago, we had a choice between carbohydrate economy and a hydrocarbon economy. Carbohydrate or hydrocarbon, and we made the wrong choice. The carbohydrate economy was hemp. Anything that you can do with fossil fuels, you can do with hemp, plus more. And just think the fact that, you know, the word canvas comes from cannabis. And so it turns out that a lot of our tribes have both feral varieties of hemp left over from the, you know, eradication programs. Somehow they didn't get to us. So there is some hemp in our territories, some cannabis sativa in our territories. It still grows, but there is an initiative underway now for tribes with large land areas to begin looking at hemp as a part of transforming the materials economy. Because if you could take all the things you make of plastic and make them out of hemp, that'd be revolutionary. And that's what I want to see. So up in northern Minnesota, we're growing hemp. And this year I was really pleased. I sent hemp seeds out to a bunch of farmers and native farmers all around the region. And I just want to share a picture of Madonna Thunderhawk and her daughter, Marcella Gilbert. And they're in, of course, the movie Warrior Woman. And then I sent them their hemp seeds and they looked really happy. So, you know, it is good to be part of the revolution. This is what our fiber hemp crop looks like. Just showing you some pictures of it. And just to say again that, you know, if you want to transform the world, this is our opportunity. Systems are crashing. Idols are falling. Fossil fuels are failing. Now will be the time to walk through that portal and to make that new economy. And so from my little neck of the woods up on the White Earth Reservation to all of you elsewhere, let's get local. Let's get renewable energy. Let's get local foods. Let's grow some hemp. And let's use our Indigenous knowledge of transition. Remember, we're people that are post-apocalyptic. We have lived through our own apocalypse. And as the world around is shaking, remember, we can be coherent because we know how to get through this. Stick with our traditions and pray hard. Miigwech, thank you for your time, and make sure you get yourself a green thumb. Now's the time, Miigwech.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. You know, Winona is, some people refer to her as an unsung orator of our times. And I think, you know, she's just got such depth. She actually, when she went back to the White Earth Reservation, she did not know the Ojibwe language at all. So in the last many years, she has become fluent in Ojibwe. And I think that that has a great deal to do with what she wants people to learn about. I've just put up a few of these things that she spoke about: the corn, the squash, the potatoes. And I want to draw attention again to some of the words that she's used. Protection for Omegang or Omeking, which is the land to which the people belong. And that's an interesting, we belong to where we are supposed to be. We just do. And that's why I'm back here in my home. And she talks also about the seeds, because the seeds won't produce if they aren't on the lands they're supposed to be on. So this is something really important. In terms of the potato, you know, there's evidence of the Peruvian potatoes being in New Zealand many, many years before the aspect of colonization hit the Americas. So we know that Indigenous people worldwide had trade routes and that they actually used food that could sustain themselves. The thing about the potato, in Peru in particular, the Andean people and the Quechua people there that are raising these crops, the potato has a potential to address international food insecurity. So it's something that she draws our attention to, that we all must be attentive to. And right now, I think that they have, you know, these potatoes have sustained themselves for 13,000 years. People in the Andes have been growing them. They've been growing them themselves for over 7,000 years. And they're really tough. I mean, there's 4,000 varieties. We're not talking about a genetically modified potato where there's 2 types that cannot withstand potato blight. So we have a lot to learn from the people of the Andes and the Quechua in particular. The other thing is this squash that she talks about, Gitiogosamin, which means the really, really old, cool squash. We know that we have to be growing some of these plants. The same with the corn. She's talking about the various types of corn, the Mandan corn, which can grow in Canada, that's going to address these issues of climate change in respect to drought and in respect to wind. The Oneida corn that she's talking about, that has a piece of what we know as the Three Sisters. It's got a really big role to play in that. So when we think about what the Three Sisters mean and do for Canadians, what we can learn from them, because it's part of the Eastern cultures of Indigenous peoples, this notion of the Three Sisters and companion growing, or I guess it's called interplanting in today's society. So this idea of companion growing or interplanting really is based on the knowledge system here in Canada of the Iroquois and the hill planting methodology that they've used. So it's a combination of planting the corn, later then planting the beans, and then finally planting the squash in order to retain the soil, to provide nutrients back into the soil, and to also give nutrients to those of us that are eating it. So something that is important is teaching children around us in these principles of sustainability. What are we doing? We have to teach children about the problems that we're sustaining in the world in respect to climate change. How do we do that? We talk about the Three Sisters gardening. We show the history. We show the Indigenous history of how these gardens grew and the history of what's happened to them. We also talk about what we can harvest and how the land is, I guess, repatriated in a way. It's re-engaged through the planting of specific kinds of heritage plants or the old, very old plants. Something that Winona LaDuke has been involved in for many years is this understanding of wild rice and the protection of wild rice through the White Earth Project, the Recovery Project. So she's been involved in protecting the sacred wild rice, which is in their territory, from genetic engineering or the GMO push by many, many universities, including the University of Minnesota. She's protected wild rice in her community for many, many long years, and she's been involved in trying to build relationships between the knowledge keepers, the Anishinaabe knowledge keepers, and the University of Minnesota and other universities right across the world. Finally, the University of Minnesota is taking heed and listening to what's happening, and the what I've placed here in this little quote is Manamunin, or wild rice, within all Chippewa ceded territories, possesses the inherent rights to exist, flourish, regenerate, evolve, as well as inherent rights to restoration, recovery, and preservation. And these rights really are based on the work that has happened in Bolivia. In 2010, the Bolivians passed a law called the Law of Mother Earth. So they're protecting the earth as a living being. And the the White Earth Reserve, they've created this new law called the Rights of the Manoman. So the rights of the Manoman, the rights of the wild rice, is the right to clean water, freshwater habitat, the right to a natural environment free of industrial pollution, the right to a healthy and stable climate free from human-caused climate impact, the right to be free from patenting, the right to be free from contamination by genetically engineered organisms. So this is the work that Winona has been doing, and she has been leading right across our nation, and particularly in the communities now where wild rice exists as a sacred food for the Indigenous peoples of those territories. I think I think I've got more slides than what I have time. Whoops, is that right? So I'm not going to actually show you Winona's Hemp Farm. And this is just a video that is set to music, but if it's recorded, people can go to it. Essentially, it's a vision that she had more than 20 years ago, and it's been moved from a farm into an actual state of milling so that many products are created from it. And as she said, hemp farming is the new green revolutionary farming. So it's something that we all need to be paying close attention to. It's a type of crop, as she said, that is drought resistant. It doesn't need a lot of water. It produces many products that can be used to replicate those things that we're using now in terms of plastics and fibers and materials that we use for clothing and other things. The other thing that is important is to note that historically hemp farming and the production, the mills, hemp clothing used to be a very important feature of American society. And so there's no reason that we cannot produce hemp and mill it and produce the products that we need to actually sustain ourselves on many levels. Coming to the end of this presentation, before we get into a discussion about everything that Winona LaDuke has done, is this conceptualization of reconciliation that we have in our country and right throughout Turtle Island, across the world. So if we're talking about reconciliation, are we talking about, the 94 calls to action? What are we talking about? Are we talking about rematriation of those seeds? Are we talking about redeeming ourselves, or redemption? What does redemption mean? How do we help people come away from where they have been to see something new? And I know that the University of New Brunswick and St. Thomas University, they've been working together to reclaim the Indigenous, the Wabanaki knowledges. And so this is a picture of the first sweat lodge that was actually built right on UNB campuses a couple of years ago. I was lucky enough to be there that day, and I was one of two women, Elder Imelda Purley being one of them, and I was invited. And so we helped build the sweat lodge, and it was the first time that a ceremony was conducted on UNB campus. So this reclaim, this understanding of reconciliation goes deep into the cultural knowledges and the language and the ceremonies of the Wabanaki Nation. And I think Winona LaDuke, in all of her messages about Anishinaabe tradition and culture and knowledge, is saying the very same thing. So right across our territories, we have people that are reclaiming in different ways. What we want our students to understand is how this idea of reconciliation or resurgence can come about, and what it truly means for Indigenous peoples. And something that I learned from Winona LaDuke very early on in my career when I was working on my dissertation, I was trying to locate these understandings of reconciliation that came from the language of the peoples. And when people don't understand Indigenous languages, when they have no access to Indigenous languages, they're going to miss what it means to be reconciled. An important thing to understand is that there is no word in any of the Algonquin languages that means reconciliation. There are a number of words that mean redemption. There's words that mean this idea of resurgence. There are words that mean looking after and protecting each other's spirits so we can move forward. There are a number of words that are embedded within Cree knowledge systems, for example, within Mi'kmaq knowledge systems, within Wolastoq knowledge systems, within Ojibwe knowledge systems. So, yeah, I found, because I am so connected with many Indigenous Cree scholars and linguists and elders, I was able to find the word that meant redemption in the Cree language, and I'll talk to you about that after we see Winona's presentation on what it means to be in this understanding of reconciliation, or in her words, redemption, because really that's what we should be looking at.
Sometimes I say, what would Nelson do? You know, talking about Mandela. What would Mandela do? I mean, you look at the situation of, you know, South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You look at, you know, the president of Liberia, the first woman president of an African country, Ellen Johnson. She said, I believe in redemption. There's two sides. One side is the apology, in which the perpetrator says, what I did was wrong, and I would like to make amends to you. That has not happened. And the other side is the offer of redemption. Because as Mandela said, is that the perpetrator also carries this weight of the crime and becomes his own victim in that dynamic of having done something egregious. And so in that guilt, the perpetrator is not healthy either. So the process of apology and redemption, or forgiveness, yeah, is a mutual healing process. I believe it takes at many levels. And, you know, I mean, the best story I know of that is today, this story, which is, you know, it's not essential to your film, but the Pawnees were driven from their homeland in Nebraska. And with them, they took their sacred foods that they grew. Their pumpkins and their melons and their beans and their corn. And they moved to Oklahoma, and they could not grow them. And their sacred seeds dwindled and dwindled until they had very few of some of those varieties. And then one day, a descendant of the settlers in the Pawnee homeland near Kearney, Nebraska, called the Pawnees and said, we would like to grow your seeds. Would you let us? And the Pawnees deliberated long because they had very few left. But they sent those seeds back to Nebraska. And the seeds flourished. And what the Pawnees told me was that the seeds remembered the land they came from. And in that, there was both an apology and a redemption. And 2 years ago, they had a Pawnee homecoming, Welcome Home Pawnee Days in Kearney, Nebraska, and 8,000 people came to welcome the Pawnees home. And so in that story, you have that corn is more than a food. It is a history. That seeds have spiritual meaning, and that corn in itself, though, needs relationship to humans. You have the loss of that sacred relationship and the need in itself of those seeds for their land. And then you have people who make history through their redemption. Now, of course, I know you don't have any footage of that. You just have me telling you, but I saw it. Isn't that cool? And I mean, it's the same thing as the Wintu story. When they get there, you know what I'm saying, is when they get their salmon back, it'd be the same thing. That's why I want I want to talk about that story, because that's what I see. But to me, those people in Kearney, Nebraska, exemplify apology and redemption in action.
I have to say that that's the most moving piece of work that I have been attached to from Winona LaDuke. There's another piece of work that she talks about the buffalo and what's happened to the buffalo and what it means to be in harmony with the buffalo. But this piece on the seeds and this understanding of redemption, it's just the most powerful thing that I was ever able to discover when I was doing my research. And I've actually written about it in a piece of work that came out of my dissertation research called Sasipiki Tatamawin, a story of these two Cree Okama knowledge keepers. And when I was looking for a word around reconciliation and I discovered this piece about redemption, I was just blown away, because at the same time I was having a conversation with Solomon Ratt, who is a Cree linguist, a Cree professor. He's from Stanley Mission, Saskatchewan, and he's part of the Woodland Cree Nation. And he told me that the word Pamachachiwawin is the closest word to reconciliation that there is, and it actually means redemption. So I went into a great discovery on what redemption meant and I discovered this piece by Winona, and it just really gave me such joy that I was able to come to that understanding. So I just want to tell you that Pamachachiwawin is this word that is closely associated to redemption, and it actually means, in a literal sense, to give life. And because of that Cree understanding, it holds a really close relationship with another word called Kanawetawin, which is how it is that we protect each other's spirits, all living. So each other as human beings and all other living in our society. So every single blade of grass, every tree, every rock, every winged one, every fish. So these are things that are embedded in the language. And this idea of Pamachachiwawin is also related to Wakotawin or Wakutawin, being in relationship. We are in relationship with one another. And it's moving right past this idea of a Western form of reconciliation into a redemptive relationship that gives us the chance to apply an authentic action to get to this place of Pamatsawin, wellness, or Mino Bamatsawin in Ojibwe. And it also gives us a space to enter into an ethical space for engagement that Willie Ermine, another Cree scholar, talks about. The ethical space of engagement it's related to the wampum belt in a sense. We have Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples paddling on the river. And when they come together in the middle space, they have an opportunity there to actually learn how to work together. But if we go back to the understanding of redemption or Pamet Chichiwawen, we understand that Indigenous people are given the space in that river to be the ones to lead the way, to be the ones to speak first, to be the ones to apply their worldview to the way we must conduct ourselves today. And these ideas are what isn't required for transformation in our society. They're attached to the deep meanings within the language. And so in Ojibwe language, Wanakiwawen is this idea of walking in peace. And as a no guton is we are able to transform. And these things are all interconnected and connected within Indigenous languages. So we just have to keep that in mind if we're going to actually be the people that are going to choose the green path. Or how are we going to help everyone get onto the green path? And what must we do? We have to learn from the elders, from the linguists, from the knowledge keepers, more about the language, more about the culture, more about the tradition, if we are to reach out and get into this place where we can be those that understand reconciliation or redemption. So the last thing I just want to say is, it's been a good exercise to reacquaint myself with Winona's work again. I just admire her so much. And there's just so many resources that she has available to all of us, especially to our students that are learning about environmental racism, environmental destructions, environmental justice. And because of the work that I do in these areas, there's no one that really, there's multiple people working together right across the world. And so we just have to understand that, if we have some leadership, like a person of Winona's stature, we should be able to present that and show others about the work that she has done. And that's what I'm trying to do. So I just want to say this, I just want to read out this quote from one of her resources. Across the continent, on the shores of small tributaries, in the shadows of sacred mountains, on the vast expanse of the prairies, or in the safety of the woods, prayers are being repeated as they have for thousands of years. And common people with uncommon courage and the whispers of their ancestors in their ears continue their struggles to protect the land and the water and the trees on which their very existence is based. And like the small tributaries joining together to form a mighty river, their force and power grows. This river will not be dammed. And I just want to acknowledge Winona LaDuke, all of her work. And in this photograph, I was lucky enough to be able to be in conversation with her in 2018 in Regina. And also Nina Wilson, who is one of the founders of Idle No More. She lives here in Saskatchewan. And so that's my presentation. I hope that we can have some discussion, especially on this understanding of rematriation and redemption. So Chimegwich, Walalin, Waliwin, Marcy.
Thank you very much, Margaret. It's really a lovely presentation. We're going to open the floor then to questions.
This video was published by the nbmediacoop.org in New Brunswick, Canada.